Well, thank you everybody for having me. My name is Kyle Oliver, and I'm here to tell you about a remarkable community that I've spent much of the last 5, 6 years accompanying as a ethnographic researcher and media maker. And so, in line with that, and noting what Daniela mentioned in the introduction, that this is a largely media-based piece of work, I'm going to introduce you to Tapestry the best way I know how, which is to play a little bit from the introduction of my dissertation. Just a heads up that if you would like a transcript, now is the time to either grab this link here, or, whoops, sorry about that, or to use the QR code that will take you to, I hope, the appropriate page in the PDF version of the document so that you can follow along that way. Otherwise, I invite you to just listen in. So I'm going to play this first bit of tape.
I guess the question for me first is sort of like, when and how did you decide that you weren't planting a church?
Well, it's sort of a complicated question because, I mean, it was a journey, right?
It's October 17th, 2019. I'm sitting in a downtown cafe speaking to two participants in a research project.
And in that journey that began with the thought that we would plant something that looked traditionally churched, only to come to the conclusion we weren't going to plant anything that looked traditionally churched, only to discover that we've planted a church that doesn't look like church.
Sam is a pastor, as you've probably figured out. Pastors who start new churches are sometimes called church planters. That's why he and I are both using that word.
I mean, it was definitely at the end of the first year we sat and thought about what year did he say, no, I don't think it's going to look like a traditional, or you're not going to plant a church.
The he that Sam mentioned is the regional church authority in their denomination, sort of their boss.
It maybe had been even later than that. Maybe more like a couple years in.
That second voice is Hannah, also a pastor. Hannah and Sam had come to this West Coast metropolitan area more than 5 years earlier. They are somewhat peculiar church planters.
Yeah, it was a couple years in, and we had come to him and said, we don't think we can collect a traditional congregation because most of our mentors are people of no faith or a nominal faith.
Sam just mentioned mentors, and that's the first big hint about why the organization they did plant is, in his words, a church that doesn't look like a church. Sam and Hannah used to lead a more typical congregation in a different coastal city. And through some of that church's outreach work, they started to learn a lot about their state's foster care system. Here's Sam telling the story of their organization's founding to a group of new volunteers. I call this group Tapestry, though that's not its real name. We'll get into this later, but almost all the proper nouns in this dissertation are pseudonyms. I made this recording just 2 days after our chat in that noisy coffee shop, at a training Sam and Hannah offer each month to begin incorporating new volunteers. The co-directors are sitting at the head of a conference table at a Tapestry partner agency's headquarters. Sam tells them that as Hannah learned more about the foster system, she came to him in shock about what she was finding. For example, about 1 in 5 foster youth become instantly homeless when they turn 18, and only a handful are gainfully employed by the age of 24. So they decided to take action, but were brought up short again when they started researching how.
And so we're both clergy, and we started looking for ways for our church to get plugged into being a support, and really thought that would mean writing a check to an organization. And we stuck with our, what we call our denomination, and we couldn't find anywhere to plug in, and felt more and more that we wanted to do more than write a check. We wanted to be involved somehow, and to be as much of a support as we could.
As I listened to this story for what was now the third time, I noticed both similarities and differences to other church planting narratives. For example,
So I'm going to cut off there. Sorry, I let it go a few seconds longer than I had planned. I lost track of where I was. So by now you've got something of an introduction to Tapestry, but let me highlight a couple of points. Tapestry was a sort of church plant that didn't quite work out as originally planned, and has turned into this remarkable ministry that over the course of this time with the group, I got to reflect with them on the ways that it sort of is and isn't a church, in ways that I think resonate really interestingly with Ian's paper, and that I hope we'll have some time to reflect on. To give you a sense of what the model looks like here, this is a team-based foster youth mentoring network. And so each of these teams consists of 3 mentors, and the commitment on behalf of those mentors that at least 2 of them will show up each week for one outing with the youth that is at the center of their group. And there are various layers and levels of facilitation that happen to make it easier for those meetings to happen, and to make sure that the mentor team can focus on their relationship with the youth, whereas this outside facilitator focuses on the relationship with that youth's caregiver. And then these co-directors, Hannah and Sam, are overseeing the work of the organization, and each of these individual teams, there are sort of mid double digits of these groups. I think it's in the 20 to 30 mentor team range, and they're really just limited by the number of mentors they can recruit. There's lots of interest on behalf of the local foster youth organizations in getting youth referred to their organization. So I had to try to answer in some way in this dissertation the question of what is Tapestry, and building on some thoughts on space from geographer Doreen Massey, I have theorized Tapestry as a kind of faith-adjacent space, and the social practice, because that's what what Massey says space is a social practice. The social practice at the heart of this particular space is creating a kind of possibility for healing presence for the foster youth in this group. So for me, what it means to be faith adjacent is that this space is connected in real ways to faith leaders, right? Massey says that space is relational, and everybody who is comprising this interesting space has this connection with faith leaders, even if faith isn't at the heart of what that relationship looks like for them. Massey talks about the hybrid nature of space. Like, what is space? It's ultimately a bunch of people and stuff that are different from each other and are existing together in some way. And there are both sort of religious, spiritual objectives and values, as well as secular objectives and values, all existing together in this organization, represented especially keenly by the fact that this is a very religiously diverse group of folks together, including some people of very serious religious faith, different religious faiths, and then a lot of them, as Sam said in the introduction, of nominal or no faith. Finally, Massey says that space is dynamic, and this space that I've been inhabiting at Tapestry, that dimension comes out really clearly. I think so much of what Sam and Hannah's leadership there has been about the process of sort of ongoing reinterpretation of their organization's relationship to church structures and practices. So that sense of space being this dynamic unfolding thing really comes to the fore. So what is becoming Tapestry? That's my dissertation about this research project. It's what I'm calling an ethnographic podcast, right? I was present as an ethnographer in this organization for 3-4 years. And a lot of that time I was running audio recorders, and have turned that into a documentary. And the sort of modality of that documentary is what I call storytelling with and as analysis. So there's analysis kind of along the way as we might recognize it in terms of argumentation, but the actual act of telling the story is itself an analysis of what went on. That analytic activity is like what Aristotle called emplotment. You have to choose the pieces in your story and that's already an act of analysis. So that's what the podcast looked like, and what essentially brought me to this experience was the fact that oh, somebody's messaging me that they're ducking out. Okay, no problem. Sorry that you've got to run, Annika. Um, what really brought me to my interest in this organization is that I'm really curious about what's going to happen to religious education in the US context if our current social trends of disaffiliation continue here. In the US, we don't have a lot of religious education outside of congregations or religious schools. And there's a whole lot of people who aren't involved in either. And that means that they basically don't get any religious education. And I'm interested in these different kinds of models that are engaging that reality. And this was definitely one of them. The activity itself that I was engaged in as a participatory ethnographer here is digital storytelling. If you're familiar with Mary Hess and her work, you'll know a little bit about digital storytelling, and I'll mention that a little bit more in a couple of moments here. But that was the sort of orientation that I took, and the reasons that this organization was interested in having me accompany them for some time. So my argument, or an argument we might make from this dissertation data in the context of this conference and this group, is to note that, I think that ancient and modern day prophets are really interested in what we would today call the remixing of norms and forms, right? What do we need to get rid of to embrace a deeper faithfulness, a deeper response to what God is calling us to in this moment, in this place, etc. What do we hold on to? What do we let go of? What do we change? And I think Tapestry as an organization, and as it's been sort of led by its leadership, has painted and embodied this prophetic vision of whether or not you want to call it a church. I think we would certainly say that it is some kind of sacred community. And I think the prophetic witness that has been so active in Sam and Hannah's leadership there is to want to put human relationality, and especially the practices of healing that are at the heart of those mentor teams, just through their presence with each other. They've wanted to put those at the center and prioritize those over the kind of institutional priorities of the religious authorities and the governmental authorities and the nonprofit organizations that all are sort of enmeshed with their work. And so the prophecy is sort of keeping the main thing, and really caring about these young people. So let me give you the example of remixing of practices that sort of put my hackles up to being alert to this sort of phenomenon throughout my time with this organization. I was at the mentor training that I mentioned in the opening clip a couple days after my first formal interview with Hannah and Sam. And Sam told that sort of origin story about Tapestry. And then shortly thereafter, Hannah came up and she picked up that blue backpack that you can see in the upper right-hand corner. And she started to take the items that you see on the table one by one out of that backpack, and to tell the story of Tapestry's what they call guiding principles. I think of them as the sort of faith-adjacent values that they bring to bear on the work that they do. You'll see that they are presence, hope, recreation/recreation, and communion. So, that ought to get our theological juices flowing, thinking about how they as leaders are thinking about structuring this organization that is functioning in a largely, quote unquote, secular way, but is informed by the values and practices that its leaders bring, that the mission brings, etc. And so I was watching Hannah tell this story, bring out these items, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is a godly play story. So for those of you who don't know godly play, it is a religious educational form, curriculum approach inspired by Montessori practices developed by an Episcopal priest. It's somewhat similar to Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, which is more popular in Roman Catholic circles. But it's storytelling with manipulatives that children are invited to then manipulate. And the second that I realized that Hannah had decided to make up her own godly play story to tell this group of, mostly young adult tech workers about how they would be mentoring foster youth, the more I thought, this is much more than just we thought we were planting a church, but we started a nonprofit again. There is a rich relationship with the theological heritage that these folks come from at work in what they do. And that's been the kind of theme of the project, is that sort of act of kind of remix, thinking about what do we have from our tradition that this group needs, and how do we present it in an appropriate way. So the most intriguing, I think, and also the most digital, relevant to our conversation here, is this idea that I really got from Sam and Hannah, which was that my work as a media facilitator and researcher was going to be about basically helping this, what I would call faith adjacent community, what they would call church that doesn't look like a church, that I would be helping them to sort of form the canon of scripture, or something like a canon of scripture, that would be helpful for telling the stories of this faith community, and forming the life together of the people who participate in this community. And so I'm not going to take the time to show you the actual digital story that the team that I worked with, Team Z, as I call them, I'm not going to play that whole digital story, but basically over the course of the 4th through 7th months of the pandemic, I met with this group basically once a week, and worked with them on writing a script and choosing images, and ultimately, creating this video that told the story of who Team Z is. And it talks about the kind of activities that they do together. It talks about the hard times that they had, including when one of their mentors, who was not a young adult tech worker, but was actually an older person, died. And the group had to sort of process the experience of losing one of their mentors. And then the video sort of returns to a kind of celebration of the day-to-day activities that that this group enjoys engaging in together, and that they were looking forward to getting back to once pandemic restrictions were lifted. So what I want to do is play a little more tape from the dissertation. This was what I heard from Hannah and Sam right after I showed them this story and some other media that I worked with members of Tapestry to create. So I'm going to go back to some audio here.
It covered such a range. I felt really emotional about the peg stuff, and then, but they, swung it back. Like, that's not all that defines us. We also have a lot of fun. And I think
some months after sending Team Z the final revised cut of their story, I had the chance to screen it for Sam and Hannah.
I like that balance too, of their script, but also their casual interactions, where that's where you can really hear the relationship.
I heard a lot of joy. I mean, they really like each other. It was kind of playful. And
my access to the co-directors in this project has always been much better than my access to the teams. So I started the closure process with them. After some initial first impressions about what they noticed when they watched the story, our conversation turned to how this piece of media might integrate with the rhythms and practices of their organization. Hannah responded with another tale, a very recent one.
We heard this amazing story from a facilitator this week for a little boy that we matched with during the pandemic, who's just struggled because school was a really healthy outlet for him. Mm. And his adoptive moms called in all 3 of the major agencies that we work with. Yeah. And this little boy was just resisting all of it. It took several weeks of sending him cards, and then sending him videos, and then coming and just standing outside the house and talking to each other until he got curious and poked his head out the door. I mean, it was a very slow build, but eventually he was hanging out with them. So at some point, last week, the moms were having a meeting with somebody who said, what are these mentors doing? Because we have tried everything. What is it they're doing that we don't get? And it was actually the little boy poked his head in. He said, they like me.
Wow.
And of course, like all the therapists like him, but it's their job. And he knows that. You don't convey that in an initial meeting, but I think that this video does convey that. I think that a child like that could see this and understand. They want to take me out for Italian food on my birthday and play the games I like. And
in case you've forgotten, this episode's research question is about how digital storytelling's practices and affordances were able to sort of find some purchase in the organization's life together. How can digital storytelling make a difference? In this little scene, Hannah and Sam gave perhaps the most direct and powerful answer. Team Z's storytelling ritual revealed their relationships.
So I'm going to come in for a landing here. I know I'm at time. I think that this experience we had together of storytelling as a kind of healing ritual and storytelling as helping to form a kind of canon that could be part of the as it were, evangelization process and formation process of bringing new people into this community and communicating the values and stories at work in this community is probably the best example of where this research and where the media possibilities that came along for the ride intersected with this prophetic witness and prophetic stance that the co-directors of Tapestry take. So to sum up, I think that we do have a prophetic vision here of something that looks something like church, that is resonating in a very secular city that is, on the leading edge of social trends around disaffiliation, and familiar religious rituals are being readapted there by people in good faith, seeking to serve the vulnerable in a significant way, and inviting those young people to name the value of that organization and help sort of hold the space for the organization to say, no, the young people and their interests and their priorities is and their healing on their own terms is at the core of what we're doing here, and will guide us as leaders as we try to figure out how to faithfully be something like church as we pursue this very religious mission of healing and hope. So I hope you've appreciated this chance to get to meet Sam and Hannah and their organization and their sort of prophetic vision for something like church in the 21st century. So thanks very much for having me.